all he did was appeal to, there's some stuff that looks arbitrary on your view, but on my view, it's all fine because a will secretly made it for some reason, but don't ask me too many questions about that. Anyway, here's a thing from the Quran that says Allah did something, right? It's laughable.
Welcome to the Sci-Fi Show, where we talk science and philosophy, usually with my two favourite atheist thinkers, Alex Malpass and Dan Linford. Dan had to drop out last minute, but we're going ahead with the recording because we're going to look at the claims of the Muslim apologist Abdullah al Andalusi. This is in response to a request we had from the comments. So yes, we do read the comments, and we're going to dive straight into the clips, which come from a debate that Abdullah did with Alex O'Connor and Mohammed Hijab. And here in the first clip, Abdullah is going to explain why he rejects atheism.
I've also found that many atheistic positions are not any more special or more coherent than these. For example, many materialistic worldviews argue that the universe which we see, which is finite, limited, and changing, is also somehow infinite and eternal at the same time. You just can't see it. Other atheist positions argue that the universe ultimately popped out of nothing, albeit with precisely measured amounts of energy, but no cause to determine that measure. Of course, there are also atheistic worldviews like types of Buddhism, which goes to show that atheism doesn't preclude spirituality, just God.
Right, Alex, have you come across Abdullah before? What are your thoughts on this opening gambit?
I have not come across him before, but it's I don't know. It's not that different, is it? It's sort of more of the same kind of stuff. Even Islamic apologetics, Christian apologetics, often they're not that different, are they? They're saying sometimes exactly the same arguments as each other. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess it's nice to have a bit of variety, though. Yeah, got nothing against that.
All right, so let's examine some of the things he said in his opening gambit. So the first one was, there's this contrast between we live in this finite, limited, and changing universe, but atheists say it's also infinite and eternal. What do we make of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know where that's coming from, really. I mean, it's not the sort of thing I can remember Richard Dawkins saying or Sam Harris saying. So I don't know where he's getting it from, or it's not a cliche thing for atheists that I've come across to say both the universe is finite and changing, but also infinite and unchanging.
I think he said infinite and eternal, actually, which is...
Well, okay.
Yeah.
I took it that he meant unchanging, but... So I suppose, on the one hand, there is this... I think everybody, it's just a kind of fact you're confronted with, is that there's this weird duality between sort of what I think Sellers calls the manifest image and the scientific image, right? Where the manifest image is like what it's like to you directly. So that's about like colors and sounds and like how things are presented immediately. And whereas the scientific image is like what our understanding of what the world actually is like, given our best theories of what the world is like. The two things are drastically different to each other. So scientific image will tell you, this object is not, the manifest image will tell you that it's sort of completely hard and impenetrable or whatever, right? So a thing that takes up a definite shape and space or whatever. But the scientific image tells us that it's, mainly empty space and the tiny little pinpricks of matter that are in there, they're sort of quantum and uncertain exactly where they are and where they're going and blah, blah, blah. So like the manifest image and scientific image are kind of in contrast with each other. And like, how do you reconcile those two? Big philosophical question. Now, one aspect of that relates to the philosophy of time, because like time sort of from your first person perspective, it's very natural to think about regarding change as real, because that's what it feels like, in your life. It feels like it's sort of changing progressively, a flow over time or whatever. And arguably our best scientific theories are, I guess this is not compulsory, but like it's very natural to associate a metaphysical view of what time is like with our best scientific theories. I'm thinking like general relativity, where all space-time points are just equally real, and this idea that there's change or whatever preferred frame that's moving through all the frames of reference or something, right? That's just not. You can g up the science. I mean, you can tell me better than I can tell you right? There's this like neo-Lorentzian whatever, blah blah blah. You can try and maintain that there's some privilege frame, whatever, but naturally, the most normal way of thinking about it doesn't have that. So you get this contrast between the scientific image that seems to think space-time is just a big block, and the manifest image, which is like sensations hitting me one thing after another, right? But hold on a second. So, that might be that's what I thought he must be thinking about, something to do with that. It's already quite a sophisticated thing for an internet atheist sort of thing he'd be responding to say in the first place. But on the other hand, I don't understand how is that different if you're a theist? You're still confronted with the same contrast between what your senses tell you the world is like and what science tells you the world is like. Aren't we all in the same boat with that? So I just don't. It feels like one of those complaints where you're having a fist fight and then he pulls out a grenade or whatever. I've used this analogy before, but like the problem with that is you're both going down with it. It's not going to help decide the argument, is it? Like you're both getting killed by it.
So I thought what he was saying was that we observe a finite universe, but atheists think it must be eternal, and so that if that's what he was saying, I mean, I'm not quite sure what he was saying because he just said we have this finite, limited, and changing universe, but it's also infinite and eternal. I think you could say the observable universe is finite. Obviously, we can only see so far, right? Mm-hmm. And we can't see back in time before a certain era, right? So what we can observe is finite. But there are models of the universe where it's eternal or it's infinite in spatial extent. And they don't contradict each other. They just don't, because something could be finite out to your horizon, but beyond the horizon could go on forever. So there isn't any contradiction there. But I would also say that atheism doesn't have to endorse any of these models, right? There's nothing in atheism that says the universe has to be infinitely big or infinitely old. It just doesn't. And then he goes on to talk about creation ex nihilo. Atheism says the universe came out of nothing, which of course, let's be clear, Lawrence Krauss wrote a book about that, and he's an atheist. So yes, an atheist thinks that, and maybe others, right? But there may be atheists that think the Star Wars prequels are better than the originals. It doesn't follow that atheism says that, right? Yeah. So who cares what Lawrence Krauss thinks? It's got nothing to do with atheism, and it can't be the case that the universe is infinitely old and it was created ex nihilo, right?
Yeah, that's
one
right.
of those. You can't criticize atheism for endorsing both of those, right? It endorses neither of those.
It could be. Well, I think it depends what you mean by eternal. I mean, if you mean by eternal, like sometimes you see this term in the philosophy literature, past eternal means it goes back forever. So it has no beginning is basically what it means. But then also you get this notion of eternalism, which is basically the view that past and future times are also real, contrasting with presentism, right? So eternal in that sense makes me think of like the B theory and like the block or whatever we were talking about a minute ago. So maybe I'm using the word differently to how he is, but it's not really clear what he means by eternal. I mean, either way, I don't know. I guess the classic atheists are not talking about the B theory. They probably are talking about the beginning of the universe, right? So in that case,
I think that's what he's getting at. Yeah.
Typically, they don't say both, that it has a beginning and that it doesn't have a beginning.
Right.
If they say that it has a beginning, fine. But they're not also committing the claim that it's eternal. Right?
I think atheism just says that whatever we think about the origin of the universe, it doesn't include God. That's really all that's being said. Right? It doesn't say whether it had a beginning or not. It might have, it might not have. It just says God wasn't involved.
That's right. And viewers of your channel will know better than most people that it's not scientific consensus, high orthodoxy or whatever, that the Big Bang Theory establishes creation ex nihilo. And the only question is, did creation ex nihilo happen for no reason with nobody there, or did it happen for a reason that a person decided? That's not the only question that's left. As you were telling me something about the survey results. I don't know if we can talk about that now. Is that too early?
Yeah. So we did a survey, and it was of physicists at a black hole conference, and we asked them a bunch of questions, and the only one we got consensus on was the Big Bang should be understood only that the universe evolved from a hot, dense state, and it says nothing at all about whether it had a beginning or not. Now, interestingly, we've teamed up with the American Physical Society And we've got a huge sample now. It's actually the biggest survey I think ever done of physicists. And we've got the same result, the same consensus view that the Big Bang should not be understood as the theory says the universe had a beginning, only that it evolved from a hot, dense state. So I think Abdullah here is just very, very confused. What about this other comment? He says, but atheism doesn't preclude spirituality because there's Buddhists and they're atheists. What do you make of that?
I don't really know what spirituality is, if I'm honest. I mean, you hear people use it, but it's used in so many contexts. People who sell crystals on eBay, they're spiritual crystals or whatever. Is there some meaning that connects to, I don't know, high mass in a Catholic liturgy or whatever? Is there some actual through line between them? I don't know. I don't think so. So I think it's just a word that's tagged onto loads of stuff. And I don't really care if someone thinks I'm not spiritual or if they think I am. It's almost an empty word for me, really.
Right. Well, I would also say that let's suppose spirituality, however defined, is a virtue or a vice. I mean, like, what difference does it make? Like, I don't know what the point was being made here. The context of this opening quote is he's saying, "Oh, well, I looked into other ideas about religion. Whether it was, other faiths, Christianity, or whether it was, polytheism or atheism, and I found them all wanting." And then so this was the bit where he's sort of going after atheism. And I'm like, okay, if it's true that atheists can be spiritual, so what? What follows from that? Nothing.
It's weird because it cuts against the other. So he's saying, atheism, the whole of this is going to be atheism is rubbish. But presumably he thinks spirituality, whatever that means, is good because he's religious. So he probably thinks spirituality is good. So what is it like? Despite all the bad things, here's a nice thing to say about atheism. Like, why are you saying that in your debate, bro? Like, what? You don't need to say good things about the thing you're trying to tear down. Just give me the argument about why it doesn't go right.
And it wasn't in the tone that he thought it was a good thing. It was like, here's all the problems with atheism, and then he had that in the sort of list as if it was a problem. Like, it's not a problem. It's just so strong. Yeah. All right, let's jump to the next clip.
But atheism's denial of the existence of God carries the minimum corollary, that reality is completely explainable without God. And they'd be wrong in my estimation. There are 4 aspects of reality that only Islam's concept of God can ultimately and soundly explain, while atheism cannot do so without falling into self-contradiction. And these aspects are change, matter, finitude, and specificity. Atheism rejects the only sound explanation for change. If this moment depended on an infinite number of previous moments and movements, we'd never exist or get here. If I were to say that my opponents can begin their speech after an infinite amount of time, they would never have the chance to start their speeches, as an infinite amount of time can't end or even begin, if you think about it. Likewise, if I asked a poor student, not pointing to anyone in particular, for £1 and he didn't have it, and he asked another who was equally poor, and so on, I'd never get that £1 until the chain of students found at least one student who had £1 to begin the chain of lending and eventually get to me. Now, this is known as the infinite regress fallacy, which is the same as asserting a beginning and no beginning at the same time. It is a contradiction and therefore impossible. The existence of change and movement requires a first mover. There's no way around that. And if it is the first mover, it means it chose to move things without being moved by anything else. Therefore, it has a will. This is the key characteristic of God, whose name is Al-Mubdi, in the initiator in the Quran.
All right, Alex, obviously we've come to some of these arguments before, but maybe not everyone's seen our previous stuff. So let's start with the first claim, which was, what did he say, that atheism has to explain all of reality or something without God?
That's a weird claim because, and I think he comes back to this in maybe the next clip as well. So we might also talk about it again. But there's this weird version of his argument where it's like atheism is committed to the view that everything is explicable without God. But it doesn't seem quite right. I mean, there's some little nuances, at least anyway, that are worth clearing up. I don't know that if you're an atheist and you think that God doesn't exist, it doesn't thereby mean that you think. I don't know why it should make you think that reality is more or less explicable than you thought it was in the first place, right? So you might be of the persuasion, that there's some mystery in the world, like ontologically or whatever, and it's not comprehensible entirely. Maybe some, big, deep super mystery or something that just cannot, can't be explained. Or you might think something, it's not really even clear. What does he mean explicable in principle? I mean, there might be an explanation, so if we pick some, like, why does everything exist at all, or whatever, like maybe there's an explanation for that, but maybe it's like beyond my ken. I mean, I'm going to be here for a few short years and I'm quite thick. So like, I probably don't know how to explain it, right? But that doesn't mean, what atheism can't explain it means something more than just like this atheist can't right now explain it, right? It means there's no possibility of explaining it, I guess, unless you include God in it. And it just sounds like a weird claim then in that case. Because, like, I don't know, how can you possibly prove that there couldn't be an explanation? I'd have to see the argument, but obviously his argument for it is not going to be very good. Right? Because all he's saying really is, here's some things where the straw man atheist explanation isn't as good as the very brief outline of the explanation I'll give from my religious perspective. My one-line explanation of how it works on my religion is supposed to be better than this straw man that I knocked down. And that's just like a really, really floppy argument with loads of wiggle room and loads of like, what do you mean and what's this and stuff like that. So it's not tight, not airtight whatsoever. So the setup was just weird, like the explanation, the call for an explanation. And the claim that there couldn't be an explanation for these things. It would be better to say, here's like somehow the atheist explanation, and we'll compare some like explanatory power, ad hocness, blah, 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 some kind of normal theory comparison between the two. Now, that I could get on board with to some extent, like make it an abductive argument or whatever, but he wasn't really using that sort of language. So, I found that whole bit weird, actually.
Yeah, I mean, the way I thought about it was, atheism doesn't say that everything can be explained without God, because it doesn't say that everything can be explained.
Exactly.
So, but rather, those explanations that will arise will be without God. But it doesn't follow that we can explain everything. Like, because there could be things that we can't explain, and that's just tough luck,
Yeah, well, there might be things where, like, if the universe is a simulation, say, then you might never know. It might not be possible from within the simulation to ever know why, say, some constant has the value that it has, right? Because that just was decided by whoever set up the simulation in the first place. And it might just be like an airlock between the information that explains it outside the simulation and you in the simulation, who's never going to be able to get there. No a priori argument, no nothing is ever going to get you to know why. In which case, it is explainable, but it's not explainable by anyone in the simulation, whether they're theist or atheist, doesn't make any difference. So there could be unexplainable aspects to reality, at least relative to your perspective, and like being in a simulation or something. It's just not clear what. I guess he was just going to rule out that type of hypothesis, like a priori. Just, we're not in a simulation because God exists. That's fine.
Right. All right, so let's move on to the infinite regress fallacy. He made some bizarre comments on this. Like, my favorite one was, it says that time has a beginning and doesn't have a beginning, which is a contradiction. That is a contradiction, right?
Yeah, I guess that's a contradiction, but it's so he doesn't distinguish between the hypothesis about like whether or not the universe had a beginning, which is fundamentally about something real. It's a metaphysical hypothesis of what's there or not. And it might be that the hypothesis is contradictory, but it's not a special fallacy just for that hypothesis that's contradictory to assert it. If it's fallacious to assert the contradiction, that's just because it's fallacious to assert contradictions in general, or to assert contradictions like in this way or something. But it's not about the content of the contradiction. It's not like the infinite regress of the universe fallacy or something. There is no specific. A fallacy is like a thing that happens in a dialogue between two people, right? Like the straw man fallacy or whatever. Like, that's, I say this thing, but I've not said blah, 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 whatever, something, and violated some rule or whatever. But like, how could it be a fallacy? Like, how could it be a violation of a kind of informal rule to just postulate that the universe both had and didn't have a beginning? right? If it's a violation of a rule, it's just don't contradict yourself. So he's confusing himself about like what a fallacy is, and like confusing an actual tangible metaphysical hypothesis as if that was a fallacy just on its own, which doesn't make any sense. It's like a weird category error again. So yeah,
right. Right, and then he said an infinite amount of time can't end or even begin.
Yeah, it can't even begin if you think about it, he said. But I wonder if he thinks that paradise is an endless, infinite future ahead of him when he wakes up there. And it can't begin? What does that mean? So it must come to an end then? So paradise isn't infinite then? Like, what? I don't get it. So anyway, the right way to think about these. So he was complaining that if I lend £1 to someone, right? Am I skipping ahead? I guess maybe I'm skipping ahead to the next point.
No, you feel free to skip ahead, yeah.
Right. So yeah, he's doing this. If I ask you for £1 and you don't have one, but then you go and ask Dan for £1 and he doesn't have one, and he goes and asks whatever, and then we keep going in that way. Obviously, you're never going to get £1 if everyone asks someone who doesn't have £1 and they say, I'll ask someone, and we just sat around waiting forever for someone to find a quid. And I guess, yeah, fair enough. If that chain of people asking the next person if they have £1 did end with, or did at some point encounter somebody who did, and then they sort of send it back down again, then the amount of steps in this process would be basically 2 times the number of people, because it would go all the way up and then it would come all the way back down again, and I'd get my quid. And, you know, I guess in a situation like that, I can understand if no one ever encounters somebody with £1, it'll never bounce back down again, so you'll never get it. But I think what is important to understand about that is there's an impossibility of starting a count from, say, 1 or 0 or whatever, and then going up and keeping on going, counting and counting and counting. And clearly, if all you're doing is saying the next number of the previous number you just said, there'll always be a next number available. There's never a point at which you find a number that doesn't have a successor, of course. So in that sense, you're never going to finish the job, because there's never a point at which you've said a number that doesn't have a successor. So obviously it's impossible if you start a count now to like finish it in that sense. That's absolutely right. But the relevant thing here is actually about like that's talking about like what will happen in the future if I start counting now. And you might think, well, it just maps on to the past in the same way, right? But it's not quite the same. There's a subtle difference in that. What we're doing is we're saying we've got a sequence where it's closed at this end, as in there's a beginning, like 1, but it's open in this direction because there's never a finite, there's never a finishing last element in it, right? So it's a set which is closed at one and open at the other. But the direction that we're implicitly moving is going from the closed towards the open. And that's why it'll never complete, because like, you're going away from the bit that has like a boundary to it. You're going towards the open boundary. So obviously you're never going to get there. But when we switch it around and we think about the beginningless past, well, now the open boundary is behind us and the closed boundary is like, let's say, the present moment right now. The direction that time is moving is towards the closed boundary now, away from the open one. So obviously in a straightforward sense, it can finish, because it will finish when it gets to the end of it gets to the closed boundary, right? Which is, we've just said right now. So it's not just a perfect symmetry, because if you switch it around, future to past, we're keeping fixed the direction that we're taking time to be passing, right? So that's a symmetry breaker. And that means that like, to get a properly symmetrical situation, you'd have to have something that was kind of odd, like somebody counting like backwards in time away from you or whatever. They couldn't complete that count sort of up in the past or something, right? Reverse count up or something. But somebody counting downwards, right? If just suppose, let's take it to his analogy. Here's a different example, right? Let's say I'm at the end of an infinite chain of people. And what's going on in that infinite chain is that they're passing £1 down the chain, right? And such that if I rewind the clock 1 minute, it's gone back to the previous person before me. Rewind it a minute back, it's gone to the previous person before them, etc., etc. So no matter how far back I rewind the clock, I can tell you where the pound is on its journey. But if you say to me, where did the pound come from? Well, you know, that's like saying, where does the pound go if I keep lending it down an infinite chain into the future? It's going to keep going down the chain forever, buddy. And it's the same thing here. It's coming from further deeper into the chain and just coming towards us, right? There's no there is no beginning. So you can't say where did it start, because that's begging the question. We're supposed to be thinking about a beginningless sequence, right? Point is, I can't see any contradiction involved in this. It seems perfectly. It's not the contradiction of saying that I'll get to the end of an open sequence, because that would be weird. It's saying I'll get to the end of a sequence which was open in that direction, but closed in the direction that it's going towards, right? And I don't see what's the problem with that, right? So what he's doing, and what all this is, I think I have seen this with Islamic apologists before. There was a guy who I think you debated in Speaker's Corner a couple
Mohammed
of
Hijab, and I debated, what's his name? Sabur Ahmed. But that was on evolution. But Mohammed Hijab was another one I debated in.
Yeah.
Ali Dawa. I've debated all three of those. They're quite decent.
Well, I think I heard one of those guys, and me and Isaac went on their podcast once to talk to them about it as well. But they had this idea of a sniper waiting to shoot. He can only shoot once he's got permission from his superior, who can only give him permission once his superior has given it to him or whatever.
Yeah.
But like once you set the example up like I was doing, like there doesn't seem to be any contradiction. Just supposing, well, I've got permission just now, and there's an infinite chain of permission grantings prior to that. They only get it to sound weird if they do what this guy did, and they say something like, well, imagine the sniper asks his boss, hey, can I shoot? And the boss says, hold on, I'll ask my boss. Right now it's a count up. It's going down up the authority chain, right? And because it's open in that direction, it will never come back down again. And that's why it's not going to happen. If you forget the asking in the first place, let's just suppose that there's an infinite chain and they've always been passing the permission down towards me as a sniper. No contradiction I can see there. But if that was the scenario, then it's perfectly possible. But that's a scenario with an infinite past in it. So like, same deal. If he basically tries to generate the contradiction or confusion around this comes from fumbling around, or maybe deliberately conflating a count up and going, see, that's impossible to complete, and then somehow fixing it so that means your count down couldn't be completed as well. Sometimes they'll do it by having this bounce up and then bounce down thing. So you think the bounce down is impossible, but take away the bounce up first, and then you'll be able to construct the scenario that doesn't show any obvious contradiction, you see. So that's with all of these, you can't, you couldn't have got to the present because, if the past was infinite, you couldn't have got to the present. They all have this same sort of fallacy going on. It actually is a fallacy because it's like a bit of reasoning where it goes wrong. So I've got a paper about.
Hang on, the fallacy is on their part.
Yeah, that's right. In trying to argue that an infinite past is impossible because an infinite future is not completable. That's the fallacy. And I've got a paper which was, really it's about Andrew Loke's arguments on successive addition. But in order to talk about that, I had to explain a bunch of this. So maybe I'll link it in, I'll chuck it in the comments, because I went into a bit more detail about how this was supposed to work. Maybe I'll write another paper about it one day. But yeah, I think it's pretty definitive that it's not a good argument.
Right. I think actually Andrew Lowe used the pound analogy when you debated him on Unbelievable, I think, didn't he?
Okay.
So if I remember rightly,
in particular, it's probably like one of those traditional Arabic philosophers like Avicenna or something who did this in the first place, and maybe Aquinas or someone also uses the same analogy.
Right.
They weren't using the trains analogy anyway, which
is maybe they could have had carriages with horses being.
That's true, I guess. Yeah.
But anyway, I thought the simplest way to put this, tell me if you think I've got this right, is you can't get to the end of an endless series. So that's obviously right. But you don't need to get to the beginning of a beginningless series because there's no beginning, right? The whole point of it is a beginning. So you won't get to the beginning if you go backwards, but there isn't a beginning. That is the whole point. So it's not like you start infinity in the past, start at zero, and then you have to count up to infinity to get to today. That's the wrong way to think about it. There isn't a starting point. So they're assuming that there's a starting point in the infinite past, and you have to count up and get to infinity and say, finished, I've got to infinity to get to today. And I agree, if that was the case, you couldn't do it, or I can't see how you could do it. But that isn't the hypothesis. The hypothesis is there is no beginning. So the whole problem is moot. Is that right?
There's different ways. You could have, one, if we just say, imagine the past is infinite, That one way to understand that being infinite is that the order is like that of the natural numbers. So for every, say, day, I compare it with a natural number. And so long as I can do that and there's as many days as there are natural numbers, then it's infinite, right? But that allows us to construct this open boundary, just like the natural numbers, where there is no greatest natural number, right? That's open in the past direction, closed in this direction. Fine. I could also construct it differently. I mean, I could just add another number and call that the infinitieth number. So it is, in fact, no natural number between now and that number. It's literally actually infinitely far away from now. And that's another possible model. And let's say we give this guy everything he wanted, and he's ruled out this type of model. Point is, that's not all possible beginningless pasts, because it could just be the much simpler model we were talking about, where it's just like the natural numbers. So at best, if all of his wildest dreams came true, all he's done is knocked out one version of the infinite past and left other versions available. So it's not a refutation of the infinite past. It's a sort of modest, knocked out a few versions of it, but not the whole thing.
Right. Okay. And let's just also remind the viewers that atheism doesn't say the past is infinite anyway. It doesn't make any claim about it. So, anyway, let's go to the next bit.
2. Atheism rejects the only sound explanation for the ultimate basis behind matter. If matter gets its attributes and characteristics because it is made from something more fundamental than it, let's just say subatomic particles and forces, ultimately quarks and bosons, and these things are made of, let's say, quantum vacuum energy or fluctuations in such thing, or superstrings, one or the other for the sake of argument, what is quantum vacuum energy, or what are superstrings, if they even exist, made of? If something else, and that's made of something else, where does it stop? If it has no end, then nothing would exist. It's like saying a branch is held aloft from the ground by an infinitely tall tree, or a pond has no bottom to hold up the water, despite the water being at a specific level. The fact that anything exists and continues to exist proves there must be something fundamental that is supporting all these things, that itself isn't made of anything else and has no parts, and therefore is self-sustaining. The Quran calls God Ar-Razaq, the sustainer, Al-Hafidh, the preserver, Al-Samad, the self-sufficient.
So I found this claim so bizarre. Like, in string theory, strings aren't made of anything else. They're just fundamental. So he's demanding that there must be something that is fundamental. Okay, let's say it's strings, or whatever it is. Yeah. It might not be strings, quantum fields, something else. Why on earth does that mean God exists? Did you get something out of this argument? I didn't.
So I think he is dangerously close to being contradictory here, because it seems like on the one hand his questioning was like, I can't remember exactly what he said. He was like, here's a table, it's made of atoms. The atoms are made of quarks. The quarks are made of strings. And that what's going on is that at every stage, when you have a candidate thing, you can say, what's that made of? Which you could say is a principle that everything's made out of something else, right? So let's suppose he must be arguing for that, because he's presupposing it, at least in his questioning. Because otherwise, you could just do what you just did and say, well, this thing's not made out of anything, right? And that must be only a problem if there's a principle which says everything is made out of something else. But then what he's doing is saying, so it's almost like he's going, look, you as an atheist have to believe this principle, everything's made of something else. But me as a theist can just say, well, not everything's made out of something else, because God's not made out of anything else. If I say, well, what's God made of? Right? He's not going to say, well, strings or something, is he? It can't be made of anything. Otherwise, there's the same problem, right? Like, how do you...
dangerously close to the flying spaghetti monster, because he is made out of at least something stringy.
Spaghetti, right? At least that's amenable to this principle. But obviously, he's going to posit that there's this thing that's God is not made out of anything else. But of course, you could just say, well, maybe strings are just the type of thing that are not made out of anything else. The notion of a perfect being isn't the only thing that could be prime matter. Right, that's an idea that's been going on since Aristotle or whatever. There's loads of different versions of what that could be, what fundamentality could be. But I think there's a danger here of focusing too much on his argument and not focusing on what his version of the explanation is. And we didn't really even talk about it for the last one. But what's he saying? That the universe is made out of God? That this cup is made out of God? Is that what he's saying? That I'm made out of God? I don't know enough about his version of Islam or whatever, but I'm pretty sure in Christianity that would be a heresy to say that the world is made out of God, because that's what Spinoza thought.
Right, so pantheism, right? And
Yeah.
in fact, at the beginning, if I remember rightly, maybe people can check and correct me in the comments if I get it wrong, he actually criticizes pantheism. So, I mean, that is a pantheistic view, right? If everything's made out of God.
Yeah, but that's the thing, he doesn't say what his answer to that question is. So all we can do is guess. I mean, like, unless he's supposing there's some non-theistic prime matter, in which case, why can't I have that in my theory? But he must be supposing that the answer is got to be something the atheist can't have. But the only thing that could be is God. So there's this, like, what's it made out of question. And ultimately, his answer, if it's going to be one that we can't use, has to be God. So he's a pantheist, right? Which is probably a heresy in Islam. So.
I would have thought so. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about Islamic theology, but
and he doesn't explain it. And all he says is something like, "And in the Quran, it says God is the creator," or whatever. And it's like, that's not cool story, but that's no explanation for this philosophical problem you just set up that we're supposed to answer. Like, what's your answer to it?
Right.
So,
yeah. All right, let's move on to the next clip.
Atheism rejects the only sound explanation for finite things. If something has size, shape, charge, or a specific characteristic, what determined these limitations in the first place? If it were determined by a finite thing outside itself, an efficient cause, going on forever, it's an infinite regress fallacy. If it was determined by the building blocks inside itself, a material cause, going on forever into smaller and smaller blocks, it's another infinite regress fallacy. The only possibility left is that all forms and limited characteristics of all finite things were ultimately created by something that has no finite limitations itself, i.e. something infinite, which has no limits that need determining by something else, and therefore is the ultimate or necessary thing, and it creates all other things. The Quran calls God al-Khaliq, the creator.
Right. Is it a bit weird that he's appealing to something infinite when he's saying, well, you're committing the infinite regress fallacy. You can't have infinitives. It can only be explained by infinitives.
Yeah, I think that's right, because he thinks it's anything being infinite is a fallacy somehow. Like I said before, conflates this weird, like an ontological claim with this dialectical claim that you're doing a fallacy or something. He thinks that a hypothesis about something can be a fallacy, which is, in a way, a fallacy of its own type, because he's making a category error, which I guess is a type of fallacy. Yeah. So what's different about this? This is how is this different from the one we were talking about before? Everything's made of something, so it must be.
And what determines like why things are finite? You know, if you explain it by a finite thing, then didn't he say you're committing the infinite regress fallacy if you?
Yeah. So,
if you
but it's something
finite.
The previous two ones, because what explains why something is finite. So this cup is, only finitely big or whatever. What explains that is two candidates where, well, if it was going back forever into the past, the explanation, like an efficient cause, so like a factory made it, and then why did the factory make it? Because this is what happened to the factory that made it make it, blah, blah, blah. If you go back like that, that's just a temporal regress into the past, which he thinks he's already knocked out with his argument. But he didn't, because that argument is itself fallacious. So he's just going to say, if you ever appeal to a temporal regress, that's ruled out, but not by anything he said. And then the other, but that is just the first argument he gave. It's basically the kalam again. But now the other thing he said was that it could be explained by smaller and smaller parts of the thing. But that's just the constitution thing we just talked about a moment ago. So like, this just sounds like a different setup. But then actually it's just the same two arguments again. So not even a third argument, really. It's just it's just the same one again. But now asking, like, who made this cup this size or something? I don't know. That's the way into it. But yeah, and this, I suppose, goes back to what we didn't mention in the first one, and in the Kalam thing, was that, like, he's trying to say, well, the atheist basically, I mean, he thinks that we commit to both sides of this contradiction, but I guess when he thinks that we're on the side of the contradiction, which is that the universe had no beginning, right? Just popped out of nothing for no reason or whatever. He wants to contrast that with his own view, which is that a will sort of decided to make it. And presumably he's going to have to say something here about the same sort of thing. Like, how come, I don't know, cosmological constant is the way that it is and not some other way, right? Well, his explanation is going to be because a will wanted it to be that way and like made it there as deliberately or something. Well, okay, but I want to say I don't know what you mean by a will that's outside of time, because I don't understand what that means. But I also don't understand this notion of it being like a free choice, but that there's no deliberative process that goes on in the first place, where the options are like crunched and the evaluation is made of which one to do, right? Because if it is timeless, it basically just happens, you know, what are we even supposed to say, at once or all at the same time, at no time, something like that. It's certainly not a deliberative process. It comes first, and, a bit of reasoning, and then a commitment to do something. Like when anyone else makes a decision, it just sort of happens like that. And it just seems to me, I don't understand how that's any different from it just being random. Like, what's going on there? How do you call that a deliberative process? How is that willful? It's just, something that just happens all at once. And if you go, oh yeah, but God's will, it's like all big and better than yours, so you can't really understand it. Problem with that is it threatens the analogy. Like, why should I even think this is a will? It's so different from mine. It's outside of time. There's no deliberative process. Why even call this a will? It just seems like a brute fact that it just happened to be that way, right? Just dressing it up as a will and insisting a mind did it or something, as if that's all completely unproblematic. Like, it just all strikes me as a big fairy tale that they never really take the time to explain or acknowledge how bizarre that is. Like, it's just as bizarre as this fantasy that there are atheists going around saying the world popped out of nothing for no reason. Have you ever actually heard anyone say that? No one actually thinks that, but they're dressing it up as this is the absurd thing that we think. But I just think that if you actually look at what they're saying, it's just as weird and absurd as the caricature of what they think atheists are saying, right? So both of them, basically, we just don't know why fucking cosmological constant has its value. Someone will find out one day, and it's probably neither that it just has it for no reason out of nothing, or that a atemporal mind just clicked it into existence, right? They're probably both wrong, but everything else is still on the table as far as I'm concerned.
Right. And we should distinguish between something without having a cause and without having a reason. So, we've mentioned it many, many times before, but, there are proposals in cosmology where the universe had a zero size and there's no causality, there's no cause for the universe. But that doesn't mean there's no reason for the universe. It comes through the laws of physics. So it's not saying, so there are people, I think, that say the universe came from nothing and without a cause, but not necessarily without a reason. There seem to be different things here. So I think there could be a confusion there. And let's not forget, this is just one speculative idea of many. In our book, we've got like 25 different models of the universe, and this is just one of them. And there's no commitment from atheists that this one is right. So, yeah, it's just very, very bizarre to me. But also, I was thinking about the free will. Is there, suppose we think, okay, God's free will chose to create the universe, but then presumably God could have chosen not to create the universe. So what's the explanation then for why the universe exists? Because it could have not, God could have chosen not to. If it was a real free choice, he could have chosen not. So we're still left with no explanation as to why the universe exists, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this sort of Swinburne move is to say something like there are what's the terminology here? It's like can't remember exactly what the terminology is, but it's basically like a personal cause. I think actually is the name of it, right? So the idea is supposed to be something like when I decide to fill this with water rather than, say, whiskey or whatever, the ultimate explanation sort of bottoms out somewhere in my will, that somewhere I've just made a decision to do that, and the personal explanation is like perfectly adequate, and we use them all the time. Why did you put that shirt on today? It'd be weird if you gave me an explanation in terms of like the movement of particles or anything other than because I wanted to wear this shirt today or something, right? The personal talk is very normal, and it's supposed to be that when we're asking, well, how come the cosmological constant is this way rather than some other way, and the theist says, well, God, because God chose it. If you say something like, well, why did he choose it to be that rather than the other? They're just going to say something like, well, it's a personal explanation, so it's like perfectly, it's fine just saying that he did. But I'm very unsatisfied with that. I mean, it might be all right if I'm willing to if I'm just asking you about your shirt color, fine, you just tell me that you wanted to put that on or something. If it's like the meaning of everything in the universe or something, I kind of want a bit more than that. Anyway, personal explanations presumably are reducible to physical ones anyway. So it's a shorthand, isn't it? Like,
right. I was wondering if it's okay to say that sort of explanation is fine for if you're asking for a sort of approximate explanation for something, but if you're asking for an ultimate explanation for something, then it's different, right? So yeah, you could say, why did you put that shirt on? And I don't know, I fancied red and blue. I just picked one off the shelf. Didn't really have a lot of thought into it. That's it, right? I just made a choice, and that's the shirt I picked. But if you want to say this is the ultimate explanation for everything, that sort of seems like a wrong sort of category, right?
Yeah. I mean, basically, when you're looking at personal decision or personal explanations, I mean, it feels like they reduce either to being shorthand for physical, like there just is a very complicated statement about particles that it's the real explanation, and this was just shorthand for it. Or what you're going to do really is sort of pass the explanatory baton down one level to, why did I pick this? Well, because I wanted that kind of thing. I have a desire, pre-existing desire. And you might also, depending on how you analyze this type of thing, you might also think about the beliefs that you have too. So my beliefs and my desires, they're the things. So why did I pick this shirt? Because I've got some combination of beliefs and desires that ended up with me picking. That's why I did. It's got something to do with that. Or I just kind of flip a coin or make a random decision. But like if it's an explicable human, like personal decision, it's going to have some kind of accounting of your beliefs and your desires. So then you can just go, well, how come I've got those beliefs and desires then? Where did that come from? And I don't see how it's like escapes the demand for an explanation. I mean, I want to say, if the theist is going to say something like, well, God made the cosmological constant because he loves you and he wants you to have that cosmological constant or something. How come he loves me? Oh, because he's good. How come he's good? Because he's perfect. Well, how come he's perfect? Because he is. At some point, they're going to have to say, he just fucking is. Stop asking me why, right? And everyone's in that situation. And they can just, I feel like they just sort of, well, but I'd say they, as if it's all just like othering or something. Anyone can do this, but like, if you sort of lose sight of the fact that we're all in the same boat with this, lack of being able to explain absolutely everything, then you think you've got all the explanations and that everyone else is worse off. It feels like in this case, we're all in the same boat. It's just some people are pretending that they're not in the same boat, that they've got an ultimate explanation for everything. That's bollocks.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's move on to the next clip then.
Atheism rejects the only sound explanation for the specificity of finite things. Things in the universe, including the magnitude of the forces of gravity, strong, weak force, and electromagnetism, and the amount of energy contained in the universe, are specific to a certain magnitude, size, quantity, and quality. Considering that the universe could have one quark more than it has, the question is, what determined it would be one way and not another? Perhaps the conditions prior to the universe's emergence, shall we say, led to the conditions we see now. But this only shifts the burden of explanation further along the chain. What then determined the precise pre-existing conditions before the universe that led to our universe being the way it is? If we invoke an infinite chain of pre-existing conditions to explain our current condition or the condition of the emergence of the universe, this is yet again another infinite regress fallacy, I'm afraid. The only remaining explanation is that something ultimately chose or determined by its will all things to be the way they are. The Quran calls God al-Musawwir, the shaper.
So why are there this many quarks and not another number of quarks?
Well, but this is just the same exact thing again, isn't it? Because, I mean, I hopefully after the critique we've just been giving, hearing him just blatantly say those arguments again, it brings out how much is left unsaid. The appeal to it being a fallacy. It's not a fallacy. It's not even a plausible looking contradiction. Right? It's just he hasn't established anything wrong as far as I can see with the beginning of this.
I maybe we should just say, like the contradiction has to be P and not P, right? Yeah. So what is the contradiction with the infinite past? He hasn't stated one.
That's right. Yeah, all he did was say, if I start a count up now, I'll never finish it. And if I also have to wait for someone completing a count down, I'll obviously won't complete that. But that's, my whole argument before is you don't care about the count up. That's about the future. So a good argument would be him not having a count up, but embedded within the analogy and just having a count down. Then show me where the contradiction is, and he won't be able to do that because no one can do that because it's, well, I don't know, no one I've known I've ever seen looking into this, and history of philosophy has ever produced that contradiction. So I think that he's just wrong about that being a fallacy. And then, all he did was appeal to, there's some stuff that looks arbitrary on your view, but on my view, it's all fine because I will secretly made it for some reason, but don't ask me too many questions about that. Anyway, here's a thing from the Quran that says Allah did something, right? It's just, it's laughable. I mean, like, hopefully we've managed to explain that a bit already.
Right. And actually, one thing we might unpack, because we're coming towards the end now, is this notion that they are actually in the same boat because they believe in an eternal afterlife. The Quran specifically says, you're going to have an eternal afterlife. So if infinity is impossible, then you're basically saying the Quran is wrong. Surely he doesn't want to say that.
Yeah.
So now, of course, we've covered this elsewhere, but given that we're at the end, we can cover it again in case someone hasn't seen our other stuff. Maybe they're tuning in for the first time.
Drop a like and subscribe if you are.
Yes, do. The counterclaim will be, the future is only a potential infinite, but the past is an actual infinite. So they are not the same. So you can't use this against us. Maybe you can give us a quick answer to that objection.
Yeah, so the idea of it being a potential infinite is like saying that it's an amount that's kind of growing as time passes, and it's growing towards infinity, which you can think of as a kind of limit that it's approaching, but it never gets there. It's like an external limit, right? And that then, if it's like that, then a potential infinite, while it's boundless and can increase forever, is always finite at every moment. Right. So it's like, imagine just somebody starting to count up, and we check back in on them at some point in the future. They'll be still counting a finite number. Doesn't matter how long we wait. Right. That's what we mean here. It's always increasing. There's never a top number they'll get to, but they'll never have got outside the boundaries of the finite into the infinite. It's always going to be limited. So that's just what a potential means, is just somebody counting up, basically. Just think about a potential infinite is like the infinity of somebody counting up. It's always finite, but it's got no bound to it. And that's fine. I mean, okay, great. So I think one way of thinking about this that I've found useful in the past is this idea that Cantor first gave, where it's like, okay, if you've got a quantity that's a variable infinity like this, then that's like saying we've got some variable, like a symbol, x, and it's like a function where any input we give it, we're going to get an output, the value of x. And the value of x is always, can take any natural number as its value, could be any number, like the amount of numbers that this person has counted to. Let's say that's what x means. It could be any number, right? A million, sure. It could be 50 cajillion, absolutely. Any finite number, it could be that. If we've got a function like that, then, says Cantor, what that means is the possible values that it could take, the domain of values, right? That it's a quantifier that ranges over a domain. That domain of things, it has to be infinite if this variable is allowed to increase forever. So all I'm saying is, if I'm counting the natural numbers, and I can keep doing that without ever getting to the end, that means that there's infinitely many natural numbers. It means there's actually infinitely many. So for a potential infinite to exist, it's like a skating on a pond or something, right? Where the pond has to be infinite if you can keep skating forwards in that direction forever. The actual pond itself, the distance that you will travel if you keep going in that direction, has to already be there, and it's going to be already actually infinite, not merely, sure, your journey is potentially infinite, but if it's potentially infinite, which means that it can keep going forever, that means it must have an actually infinite base, or that it's sitting on, basically. The domain that the quantifier ranges over has to be infinite. So that
can we say this, Alex? A potential infinite implies an actual infinite. You can't have a potential infinite without an actual infinite.
That's called the domain principle in the literature. So not everybody agrees with that. Cantor changed his mind about it as well. So I'm not saying this is like rock solid, but it feels very intuitive to me. I like it. Other philosophers in the contemporary literature defend the domain principle as well. So it's a live issue in philosophy of mathematics, and it's not exactly brand new, but it's live. So to me, anyway, that's very helpful in shedding light with this difference between a potential infinite and an actual infinite. I think the sense that matters here, if you want to say, I'm going to wake up in paradise and I'm going to keep going in paradise forever, never, death has been escaped, right? I'm going to keep waking up every day and never die in paradise forever. Then that just means, your future is actually infinite. So you can talk about how my life in the past, since my death, when I woke up in paradise till now, whatever that is, has been finite. Still, you've got an infinite amount in front of you, still to go, an actually infinite amount in front of you. So in that sense, it feels like, you can't, if you've got a potential infinite of time passing, you've got an actual infinite of time still to pass.
Right. So we would warn our Muslim friends not to say that infinity is impossible, because you may be contradicting your own faith.
Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah, that's right.
It seems like that to us. Of course, leave a comment, tell us why we're wrong, but that's how it appears. All right, so let's see a summing up, and then we'll finish up ourselves.
Islam posits that God ultimately created and sustained all things. He is infinite, unlimited, and self-sustaining, and he alone measured out the numbers of things and apportioned all the regularities, or what you call natural laws, behind all things. It is the Islamic concept of God that not only explains reality better than atheism, but it is the only explanation ultimately that can explain reality that we see, which does not possess self-contradictions, circular logics, or appeals to mystery or blind faith. The arguments of atheists, in my experience, are no different to those I've encountered from polytheists, Trinitarians, or volcano worshippers. Atheists just call their God the universe, which essentially is just a bigger volcano. Thank you.
So we're just volcano worshippers, Alex.
Savage burn.
Steeped in self-contradiction, blind faith, and appeals to mystery.
I mean, I just think with that appeals to mystery thing, I just think, that only feels like he can get that punch in because he hasn't spent any time at all explaining how his view escapes mystery. But all he did was a very poor attempt at saying, look, here's a philosophical problem. Probably that guy's going to have it's a problem for that guy. But let me just very quickly tell you that it's not a problem for me and move on to the next problem, which is the same problem again, dressed up in a trivially different version of the same problem. And let me repeat that 2 or 3 more times, and then I'll sum up. Like that's my summary of how we are.
Yeah, and I would say that if we both have the same problems, well, we're assuming a universe, and that's it, and you're assuming a universe and God. So if we both have the same problems, then the no God explanation seems simpler.
Yeah, that's basically Oppie's argument. And it's just a big version. It's like a big Occam's razor, which just basically seems to say, and it's basically there's an asymmetry. If you accept that fundamental thing, well, we posit nature, so do you. You posit something beyond nature, but we don't. So there's ontologically, the theist theory carries more weight. So if it's going to be as good, normal theory comparison stuff will say it needs to make up for its ontological commitments with explanatory power or some other theoretical virtue, but normally explanatory power, right? So it's going to need to sort of catch up in the race and overtake atheism, right? It's like even the explanatory requirements of atheism is less because its ontological commitments are less. So like you don't have to just explain the same stuff. You have to explain more. You have to explain better. And, so this is why it's just showing parity between the two explanations. Still a win for atheism on this logic, right? Because you don't even need to have a better explanation. You've just got a leaner theory ontologically. So it's preferable if you have to pick between these two, right? So, that's a very powerful way of going, I think.
Cool. All right, well, we will close there. If you've got any thoughts, please leave them in the comments. And if you can subscribe, that would be great too. So we will see you next time on the Sci-Fi Show. Hopefully with Dan.
Yeah.